Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Harish. I'm the founder of Goodspeed. We are a no-code agency, predominantly using Bubble and now AI to launch products. Today, we have David Bresser, who's the founder of Excel Formula Bot. Say hello, David.
Oh, this is where I say hello. I thought you were just going to keep going.
I will.
Hey, hey, everyone. Very nice to meet you. I mean, I guess I'm not meeting you all, but it's nice to be here.
So, David and I have spoken quite a few times over the past few weeks. I think David has done an amazing job of leveraging no code and AI to build an amazingly cool business. If you don't know what Excel Formula Bot does, it says it in the name. You type in a text and it gives you the formula that you need. David was really ahead of the curve. Something I love about his story is, well, there's so many things I love about his story. He has a full-time job. He's revenue generating. He was ahead of the curve. He tested with a really basic MVP. He tested it on Reddit, blew up on Reddit. Then he leveraged TikTok influencers. Now he's using more influencers and it's just steadily grow. And I'm super excited to see where he takes it. This is a session on how everyone else can learn how to use no code and AI to launch products, just like David has done. We'll kick off with some of our own questions and then open it out to the rest of you guys. It's a pretty small session, so we'll have plenty of time for questions. But just firstly, David, take us to the start. Back many months ago, how did you come up with the idea of Excel Formula Bot, right? It was solving an initial problem of yours.
Yeah. I've been working in data analytics for about 12 years. And about July of last year, I don't know, 8, 9 months ago or so, I started paternity leave. And so I had 6 weeks. And in the back of my mind, and I'm sure folks that are joining this, the back of my mind, I've always wanted to do my own thing. And I told myself on paternity leave, I'm going to figure out how to do my own thing. And it's crazy because in July of last year, my Twitter feed, over time, it's gradually gone from like following sports writers and entertainment to the algorithm has basically just shown me like AI content and solo entrepreneurs. And I feel like I don't even know the people that I follow these days, but I got to a certain point where that's all I was consuming. And so in July of last year, I felt I was late to the game in terms of AI, but really I was like an early pioneer. And so working in data analytics for 12 plus years, doesn't matter what you do, if you're the CEO, CFO, intern, data analyst, everyone uses Excel. And so I feel like even before July of last year, I feel like AI went into two opposite sides of the spectrum. It was either like creative applications using AI, or I'd say creative and copywriting. And then the other side of it was like programming. There was no like in between. And just given my background, I was like, oh, I wonder if I wonder if AI knows Excel. And so I started playing around in the playground of OpenAI and I started asking it very basic questions like, what's the formula for the sum of column A and all this? And I progressively asked it harder and harder questions. And it wasn't great at the harder questions, but that was really my competitive advantage, having worked in Excel for 12 plus years. And the idea really came from the past few years because of COVID. My full-time job, working in a marketing analytics agency, much like other organizations, we were a victim of the great resignation. And we lost a lot of really talented people. And the agency I work for, we pride ourselves on hiring local talent. And Orlando, Florida, it's not known for its talent pool in terms of technology and analytics. And so we hired a lot of young people straight out of college. And since then, I kind of became, I say only 34, but we hired a lot of young people, and the young people couldn't go very deep in Excel. And so I gradually became like the guy that knows all the Excel formulas. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way. And, just like any concept, any idea, it starts with a problem. And the problem was, even with the proliferation of AI, these people were coming to me to write very basic Excel formulas. And so that was the problem. And then I really kind of put my head down, knowing, because the first thing that most people do when they have an idea is they Google it to see if it already exists, and it didn't exist. And I'm telling you, I spent like 5 hours looking to see if this thing existed, and it didn't. And so even on Twitter, I started learning about Bubble. I had never even heard of it before. And so with that, and something people also actually don't realize is when I started to build it, I even asked OpenAI, what should I name the company after describing what I was trying to build? And it listed out like 4 different ideas, and one of them was Excel Formula Bot. And fortunately, that the domain was available, and I purchased the domain shortly after that.
Amazing. Thank you for that background, David. So you were the guy that knew Excel, and many people say that Excel was actually one of the first no-code tools. But in other senses, you're not technical, right? So how did you become the guy that knows Excel to a guy that's actually launched an Excel and AI-focused product?
Yeah, it's interesting because back in the day, like in college, I used like WordPress. WordPress was really like the first no code website builder. I wouldn't call it a web application, rather a website builder. And I would have never thought in a million years that I would be able to develop a web application with APIs and all this other all the bells and whistles, because I honestly, like, I do not know a lick of code. And aside from a couple of custom JavaScripts that are within Bubble, everything else truly is no code. And I think what helped is actually having a data background, because so much of the work that's being done in Bubble, I think it's better to have a background in relational databases or just analytics in general and working in spreadsheets. I think it's more advantageous to have that background than it is having a background in understanding HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
And before all of that, before the APIs and before the relational databases, Excel Formula Bot was much less than that, right? It was an input and output. Just talk us through the process of how you practically got started between an input and output, and then how you started to get your initial set of early adopters and users.
Yeah, for sure. So I mentioned July of last year, I didn't know what Bubble was. In fact, when I went to the website, I typed in bubble.com, and bubble.com is not bubble.io. And so I really didn't know anything. And I'm fortunate that I started getting into it when I did, because admittedly, I personally don't think Bubble themselves does a very good job at education. A lot of the education has really come from other people, even some people probably in this room, that just willingly put together their own video tutorials. And that's all I did. And so I'm a firm believer of failing fast. I knew I needed to build this thing because it's like, okay, if I have this idea, and with AI accelerating the way that it is, I'm probably not the only one that has this idea. And so a no code application, it allows you to go as fast as you can. And even someone who didn't have any experience, although I learned a lot through video tutorials and documentation, I was able to build a proof of concept, I would say, within a week and a half. And that proof of concept MVP was literally as bare bone of an AI application as you can get. It was one page, it was an input box, an output box, and a button to hit submit. And it was one API call. That's it. And I mean, I didn't have anything. When you say bare bone, I really mean bare bone. There was no login. There were no API limits. Trust me, I racked up thousands of dollars in AI API costs very quickly. And so, it took me about a week to build this proof of concept MVP, in which when I built it, I was like, okay, I gotta share it with someone. And then, the first person I share it with is my wife, who doesn't use Excel. She's like, cool. I'm like, okay, I gotta share it with someone else. And so the first place I went, just naturally, was just a community that I had been involved with previously. Not involved in a sense of like more of a reader, and someone that engages and consumes the content, not someone that posts anything. I was like, all right, like I've been following this community for a while. I'm gonna share it. And so the first place I went after it was done, with with minimal actual testing or even thinking through the ramifications of what could happen, which I'll get to shortly. Is, I went on the Excel subreddit, and I think the prompt was like, I made this AI Excel generator looking for testers. And that post, at least within the Excel subreddit community, I would say it went viral, or as viral as something can within a very hyper targeted subreddit with several hundred posts. Got a lot of really good engagement. Started kind of learning about, like, okay, people are asking for this, people are asking for that. Started making a list of what some additional features would look like, even in the MVP. And then I had someone recommend, someone chatted me through the Reddit DMs, said, hey, cool product, you should post it on the Internet is Beautiful subreddit. And so I posted it on the Internet is Beautiful subreddit, where I think it got, like, I don't know, like 15,000 or 100,000 upvotes. And that was really the tipping point for the product. And at that point, I literally went from 0 website visitors a day to, since then, I don't think there's been a day where there hasn't been at least 5,000 website visitors. Because that next day, I'll never forget it. I was working my full-time job, and I had told a few people at my full-time job and friends, like, I'd built this, not thinking much of it. And I had a colleague of mine message me. He's like, bro, I just saw your app on TikTok. I'm like, what? And so the first thing I did was download TikTok. And so I downloaded TikTok, and he sent me the video, and I'm like, that's my video. And it was posted by a gentleman who I think now probably has, I think, 5+ million followers. It's one of those guys that kind of talk about, like, websites that feel illegal to know. And I'm like, my website feels illegal to know. And after that, like I mentioned, I didn't have a login. I didn't have API limits. So that day in which that post went viral, I think I racked up like $1,000 in API costs. But it very concerning at the time. And being the founder, I say founder of an MVP, I wasn't even making any money, but being the creator, I was like, I can do anything I want. And so I was scrambling, right? Because every day, $500,000 API cost, and I didn't have anything. I didn't have a login. I didn't even know how to build a login. I didn't have API limits. I didn't even know how to build it. And so I needed to figure out some sort of cash flow, at least to, like, kind of reduce at least break even or something like that, to alleviate the costs. And I even set up like it was a Stripe payment, but it wasn't like a fancy sort of integration, just a link out to a payment where people can donate. And I was like, please, I want to build this thing for you. Just give me some runway. And so I had a donate link. I think in total I got maybe $1,500 in a couple of weeks. And so launching with literally 0 barrier to entry, right? No login. It was like, I think I mentioned to you, it was like the Hunger Games. It was just like anything goes. I mean, people can run a bot and run 1,000 API requests in a minute. And so it really forced me to build quickly, and I was forced to learn the tool. And then over time, hire way more talented people than myself. But launching like that and showcasing it to the world, even with low barrier to entry, it does kind of create that effect of virality, right? Because you look at anything that people showcase, especially with, all the AI applications out there. You don't see a lot of people showcasing things that are behind a paywall that you can't even try it without putting down a credit card. And this, not only did it not have a paywall, it didn't even have a login required. And I do think, while at the time it was nerve-wracking because I racked up several $1,000s in cost, it was really long-term the best thing for it, because it was that catalyst of being free and truly illegal to that feeling of knowing a website that feels illegal to know. Still to this day, that same original post still today goes viral every once in a while, and people still hear about it through then. And then they get to the site and they're like, it's not free. It's not 100. I mean, it is free to a certain degree, but it also doesn't look like the post in which it was going viral. And there's a login and all that. So I get some feedback from people who are like, this website is different. I'm like, yeah, that was the MVP.
That was months ago. It feels like a big part of what helped Excel Formula Bot was initially you weren't just promoting on the subreddit, right? You were actually genuinely asking for feedback. And then the other part is it was entirely free with no barrier to entry. If you were to do it again, and if you were to recommend and give advice to those starting out now, would you advise to have a free product without any barrier to entry?
100%. Like I mentioned, short term, looking at my bank account and it being in the negative for quite some time, it was nerve-wracking at the time, but it was the best thing for it. And I think where individuals should be striving for is some sort of freemium model, and also self-serve. People, and I can touch base on this in a little bit, but over time, I started looking into influencer marketing. And I went through 4 or 5 different marketplace applications, and every single one I had to talk to a sales rep. And it's just more friction in terms of the customer journey to even test it out, or even see. I just want to see what kind of influencers were out there for this product. And I couldn't even do that without having a phone call. And so, starting off, I truly wouldn't change anything. And my approach really was, I mean, it was kind of accidental at the time, in which I had to scramble to build the additional kind of barriers of, okay, API limits, a login, an actual look and feel of a subscription-like product. At the time, it was accidental, but it was really the best thing for it. And so the approach that I would recommend is starting out with really just something that's bare bone, even at the risk of incurring some API costs. Of course, you can set up some limitation, but having very low barrier to entry to have people try it. I mean, even now, right? People visit the website. Only 35% of people that visit the website, even though it says free on it, only 35% of them actually provide their information. And that's for what I would say today is more of a product than it was an MVP. And so when someone visits an MVP, it really shouldn't have all the bells and whistles. It shouldn't look beautiful. If it looks beautiful, you built too late. And so if it doesn't look great and you're asking for a login, they're probably thinking like, it's not worth my time. This is so early on. Maybe I'll check back. So my approach is starting off with very low barrier to entry, and then gradually just kind of working your way up. And so my approach was starting off everything, Wild Wild West, the Hunger Games, everything is free. And then over time, setting up IP-based API limits. And I think it was even like 30 a month. And then after that, I reduced it from 30 to 5 per month, which is what it is today. And then the next one was requiring a login. And then the next iteration of that is more or less what the website is today, where it's a paid subscription behind a paywall, but it does have that freemium model to it as well.
Something you mentioned there that also contributed to the growth was the use of influencers. And you posted on this subreddit, which had thousands and thousands of upvotes, which then led to influencers on TikTok saying it feels like an illegal website to know. But that really kicked off an influencer strategy for you. Can you just tell us a bit about how that worked and how it led you to now launching an influencer program. That from the outside feels like one of the biggest growth hacks for you.
Yeah, for sure. So when I posted it specifically on the Internet is Beautiful subreddit, basically what I found, and I have the analysis to prove it. I'm not going to share it with anyone because it's super boring. It has scatter plots and all that. But basically what I've found is when posts go viral on the Internet is Beautiful subreddit, I think of that subreddit as like the breeding ground for viral content. And so, like I mentioned, literally a day after that post went viral on Reddit, that one individual that I mentioned with 5 million followers, he posted about the site. And then I started looking and seeing, because there's a lot of other influencers like him who have a lot of clout, a lot of followers, who solely talk about websites that are valuable to really everyone. And so I started doing this kind of checks and balance and realizing like they're getting all of their content from this one subreddit and just looking and seeing what the top results are. It's not a science. It's not like they're doing all this elaborate research. They're literally just going to this one location. And so realizing that, and then another thing that I realized through kind of my research and analysis is everyone, I feel like everyone these days wants to be an influencer of a certain type. And so what I started to realize is there's this sort of domino effect of content being broadcasted by influencers. And it starts from the top. It's a very top-down, trickle-down effect. That sounds very fancy. Top-down, trickle-down effect. But that's truly what it is. And so there's all these sort of micro-influencers who might have 5 to 10,000 followers, and you know where they're looking for content? They're not looking for content directly on Reddit posts. They're looking up at the influencers in which they aspire to be and looking and seeing what are they talking about. Because guess what? It's working. And so what I've found is the micro influencers with maybe 5 to 10,000 followers, they're looking up, and I'll just say the moderate influencers who might have a few 100,000 followers. What are they talking about? And those moderate ones, they're looking at the big dogs with 5, 10 million followers. What are they talking about? And so I found that, like I mentioned, there's kind of this trickle down effect of starting from the top. And so that individual who talked about it, immediately following, days after, there were these kind of, like I mentioned, moderate influencers talking about it. And then weeks, months following, more of the micro ones with just several thousand followers started talking about it. And so my strategy was really, one, at this point I wasn't making that much money off of the site, and so my initial thought was I'm not going to pay for influencers. I'm just going to reach out to them because I've got some time in my hands, even though I really didn't. And so my thought was, okay, I'm going to reach out to them. So I reached out to big influencers, micro ones, sharing the website, in which admittedly the conversion rate of them actually posting it, I would say, was about 5%. And so it's a numbers game. You really have to get it out there and take some time. And so I tried that for a long time. It's a very manual process because you got your script, which is more or less copy paste. But the hard part is the identification of these influencers. You don't want to just reach out to anyone. You want to reach out to someone in which their audience would resonate well. You don't want to do all this in which they create a video and it gets 10 views. And so with that, going through some struggles, I was like, okay, now that I'm making some cash flow, I'm gonna continue to grow on the basis of what got me here. And so what got me here was people talking about it. So just to throw out a couple stats, 45% of the people, I've done some surveys, 45% of the people that hear about the site hear about it on social media, another 25% hear about it word of mouth. And so you're looking at 70% right there who are hearing about it on social, word of mouth. So I started going down the influencer route. And the reason I was going down the influencer in terms of a marketplace and paying for it, and the reason I was doing that was very early on in August and September, when it was still an MVP, more so the back half of August, I wasn't making any money. Then I launched a subscription-based site, in which it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier, is people are more likely to talk about something with very low barrier to entry, where it is just free. And then once the subscription site came out, I can see it in the data, also both quantitative and qualitative, that people weren't talking about it nearly as much. And so I was like, all right, I got to reignite the fire. And so that's where I started going down the paid route. Signed up for a few marketplaces. I think I signed up for 5 different marketplaces in which creators or advertisers can meet influencers and creators. Signed up for 5, had 5 different phone calls. I had one deal for $1,000, and the video went to good traction. But for the amount of time that I put into it, wasn't worth it. And I was like, okay, like I have, like I mentioned, like I get a lot of website visitors right now. I probably get about 3,000 to 4,000 signups a day, let alone website visitors. The brand's out there. I'm just going to cut the middleman and continue to approach it and do influencer marketing. And so I created my own sort of influencer marketing program where people go to the site, they input their email address, they write why they would be a good advocate for it, because I don't want just anyone talking about it. Especially if they have content that doesn't resonate well with the everyday consumer, if they're I don't know. And so I had to be very selective. And so I put it out there. I was broadcasting it on the homepage of the site, within the dashboard, in which I was getting really good traction. I think of the total number of people, there's probably about 2,000 people that signed up, everyday individuals across the entire globe. That said that they would love to talk about it, because that's what marketing is these days. Is people see through, the everyday consumer sees through a typical advertisement. And so what really resonates well is the compounding effect of social media and that kind of sprinkling in word of mouth. And that's where you get the user generated content. And that's exactly what I was going after. And so I was fortunate enough to work with a handful of people in which I literally, on the page in the whole campaign, I literally paid people $5 for every 1,000 views that the post would get. And they had to abide by some things like use the hashtags and tag us and have a positive video. Of course, I'm not going to pay them if they say that the platform sucks. In total, I probably paid out about $7,000 with one really going viral. I think I ended up paying out about $3,000 or so. And $5, it's not a lot, but it's not a little. But how I thought about it is, if I were to go directly through an ad network, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, whatever it is, you can't get a $5 CPM anywhere. So not only was I getting a low CPM, but I was also getting free user-generated content. There's definitely some things I learned. One very basic thing that I failed to miss, or that I failed to think through, is the geographic concentration of their audience. And so I would say 50% of the user base in terms of users come from the UK, America, and Canada, but they make up 80% of actual paying customers. And so I did work with some influencers in which their audience didn't skew where my paying customers were. So it got a lot of traction. And one thing I found is for certain individuals, there tends to be a very high concentration, a very high skew of their audience based upon where they live. And so if you're American and you're speaking to your audience, naturally, a lot of your followers are going to live in America. And so I started running some campaigns with this influencers. It's literally everyday people, because what I'm looking for is someone who may not have a lot of followers. They might have 50 followers, but you don't need 1 million followers to go viral. I had one individual where my work account, my Excel formula about brand account at the time had more followers than this individual. I think this individual maybe had 400, 500, but they posted it. It went viral because she had a great hook. And after she posted my video, she then had more followers than me. And then I reached out to her and I said, hey, can I repost it? In which that video actually went more viral on my own brand when I reposted it than hers. And so that was awesome. And the other thing also is, in the campaign, I had it set up in a way in which I'm only paying out for views up until 14 days. And so there's one campaign where it started gaining a lot more traction after the 14 days. So there was that side of it. And then lastly, I was only paying out if it got, I think it was like at least 50,000 views. And so if it didn't reach 50,000 views, even if it reached 49,000 views, I wasn't paying for it. And so overall, I say the effective CPM was about $3, which is like absurd. So yeah, that's a little bit about the influencer program that I launched. For right now, I pumped the brakes on it so I can focus more on the product and some of the development work, but it's definitely something that I'm going to be revisiting again.
That's amazing, and some really practical tips. I have two questions before we open it up. You spoke about not having much time, but also reaching out to loads of influencers, and you don't have much time, right? You have a full-time job with a great side business that is some people's main business. How have you managed to run Excel Formula Bot while also having a full-time business?
The biggest thing, we were briefly talking about this before the session, was just finding talented people. And so I built the MVP myself, and I would have never been able to build what it is today and what it's going to be in a month from now without help. And so once I started to get positive cash flow, it coincided with the time in which my paternity leave was coming to an end. And so that's where I had to find talented people, and one of those talented people are here, Adil, in which he had years of experience. And so my day-to-day operations went from me doing everything: marketing, social media, managing the influencer campaign, doing the development work, to, hey, I've got to go back to my full-time job. And so working with them through, communicating on Slack, Upwork, WhatsApp, even having phone calls to start my day, having phone calls with these individuals at the end of the day, just delegating all of the things that I would have done to people that I can trust. Obviously, it all comes at a cost, but that's another reason why, I went back to my full-time job, is I'm not paying myself. It's still, to this day, it's made over $100,000. I have not done one transfer to my own bank account, because literally everything goes back into the product. And a lot of it is the people. Good people come at a price, but that's okay, because I've learned through trial and error that you typically get what you pay for. In which I think I hired my first bubble developer that said they had years of experience, but when they actually came down to it, they were just as good as myself. And you get what you pay for. And so everything, like I mentioned, goes back into the product. And then I'm hoping, as the business continues to accelerate, that the beautiful thing about recurring revenue from subscriptions is that it compounds. And so it's been accelerating very quickly. And so right now I'm double dipping, but really it's really just myself coming up with the idea and the vision and the concept. And occasionally I'll do a wireframe and literally just handing it off to someone else to help me kind of pass it through the finish line.
Nice. I know how important it is to find amazing talent that transform the business, and how hard it is also to find amazing bubble developers. That's also why we exist. You spoke a bit about product upgrades, and also at the start where you launched it, you needed to really build quickly. Now, last question from me. The things that are happening in AI right now are amazing, right? But it's also really hard to keep up. How do you manage to develop the product to keep up with the developments in AI, while also being cautious of like a big player that may come in? If that's
Yeah.
even a worry, right? It may not be a worry.
No, it's clearly a worry. That's why every dollar has gone into the product to build it. If I didn't do anything, if I remained stagnant and I paid myself, this nice salary in a few months with the big players coming in, obviously Google and Microsoft, if I didn't reinvest it into the product, I'd be screwed. My recurring revenue would probably gradually go to zero. And that's where, what I think is going to win in terms of any AI startup is an AI application that builds layers on top of just what my MVP was of an input box, a button, and an output box. And that's what a lot of these applications are, is the output is a response from OpenAI. I think the future is building layers in which the AI is not the product, rather it's the feature. And so that's exactly where I'm headed. And so the rebrand, it doesn't even have anything to do with the layer on top of it, but I'm currently rebranding from Excel FormulaBot to FormulaBot in the next few weeks or so. Because right now it's not just Excel, it's Google Sheets, regular expression, VBA, app scripts, SQL, and all of those were customer feedback, things that customers asked for. And there's a whole laundry list. And so really the future is, at least in my opinion, like I said, even something like ChatGPT, right? Because I've got my churn rate is about 8%, 10% of that 8%, they unsubscribe and literally tell me it's because of ChatGPT. And so in the back of my mind, I think, yes, Excel or Microsoft and Google, they're more likely going to build some sort of functionality that can replace this. It might come at a higher price, especially because they're going to sell it a la carte. They're going to sell the entire suite. But obviously a clear threat, which is why I'm pivoting. And I forgot what I was trying to get to, but yeah, I mean that's a big reason as to why. So ChatGPT, I think of ChatGPT as a competitor. So everything that I build, I say to myself, can ChatGPT do this? And if it can, I don't build it because why would they? Even like my application, it's obviously, even now, current state without the additional layers, it's more convenient, right? Where it's more convenient in a few ways. You've got the add-ons, it's embedded right in your spreadsheet. You get just the formula, because a lot of people, they just care about the formula, easy copy paste. You get a ChatGPT, it's this long explanation of the formula. It's just not very convenient. And also accuracy, all right? Because when you're working with data, you want it to be accurate. And so mine is more accurate. It uses GPT-4 with enhanced prompting, which is more accurate than ChatGPT, especially for multi-language. One thing that GPT-3 really struggles with, or 3.5 really struggles with, is language translations. GPT-4 much better. And so conveniency and accuracy definitely go a long way, but it's also hard to incorporate that as your sole value proposition, as opposed to going straight through ChatGPT. And so that's where the additional kind of layers come in, where what I'm building, at least maybe a few months when it's, or a few years when it's GPT-10, but what I'm building, it can't be recreated in ChatGPT. That's what I think people should be striving for, is can it be built in such a mainstream application? If yes, then why would people do it? Why would people use your product?
Yeah, I love that question. When anyone's building now with AI, to ask that question, can ChatGPT do it? We have a question from Brandon. What were the key security challenges you encountered when transitioning from your early MVP to a more comprehensive product, and how did you address them? Thanks, Brandon.
I really can't think of any security challenges. I mean, I did hire, like I mentioned, I think Adil, who's here, he was the one who helped me set up the proper login credentials. And so outside of recently where I am adding on the additional layer, everything was done within Bubble. The login credentials, the API calls, the data storage, all of that is done in Bubble. And so all of the security, I think all of it's done behind the scenes through AWS and I think Cloudflare. It's really been seamless, right? Because all I did, I went from IP-based usage to which it still uses just the current user ability within Bubble as more of a fallback if you don't have a login. And so I really didn't have any security issues. The beautiful thing about Bubble is you don't have to be an expert in all things when it comes to building an application, because oftentimes if you're building an application like this, you need someone who is solely responsible for data privacy and security. You need someone, a software engineer, to actually build the platform. You probably need 3 or 4 people that go deep in their own specialties like security and development and even API management. And I promise you, I cannot go deep in any of those things. And so I'm more of a jack of all trade, master of none, but that's exactly what you can build and be when you're using Bubble.
Awesome. We're big fans. We have a question from Mike, which I'll also add on. How did you arrive at your subscription price? And also, how did you arrive at what you would offer in each of the tiers?
Well, actually, when I launched, it was for a couple months. The price was actually $2.99. In hindsight, I definitely made money, but I needed, more or less 3 people to sign up at the equivalency of what it is now of $6.99. And it's $6.99. Admittedly, I think it's pretty low compared to the value that you get out of it. But at the same time, building in Bubble, it's a more or less, even obviously I have hired freelancers, but operating costs are very low. Even with the whole thing with Bubble and changing the prices, I still have 18 months to go. But operating costs are very low in a sense that I pay out freelancers, Bubble application, and OpenAI costs are very low as well. And so I priced at $6.99. One, it's the exact same price as the current Microsoft Office subscription, which surely with AI integration will increase. Immediately, I priced low because I wanted customers. And I wanted customers because even when I priced this thing out, I knew the direction that I wanted to take it. And it'll be a lot easier to engage, or rather re-engage with those customers, hopefully upselling what the product is going to be, as opposed to just being an everyday user of the product. Naturally, if you're paying for it, you're going to be a little more intimate with it. And how I arrived, I think you mentioned like the usage limits. And so, this application, I think it's a bit different than the pricing and the usage. I think it's a much different approach than other AI applications, where you have some applications that are based upon tokens, which more or less is what the price is based on. But guess what? The everyday consumer doesn't know what a token is, even if you have a page that talks about it. And so I've used tools like that where it's all based upon usage, and it can get nerve-wracking where it's like, oh my God, I'm going to hit my overage. I don't want to pay additional, all this stuff. And frankly, an Excel formula, it's not very lengthy, right? It's not a copywriting site where it's going to write an entire story. So the number of tokens is very minimal. And so I did the analysis very early on when it was priced at $2.99. And I did the analysis, and I basically said, hey, the average number of requests and tokens is X. I can price it at this and kind of figure out what the profit margin would be for every single user. I ran some estimates. Even going from $2.99 pricing to $6.99, I think I only lost about 30% of the customers of new subscribers, which when you're more or less going from $2.99 to $6.99, If you think about it linearly, you think you lose a lot more than just 30%. And so the everyday consumer, and that's what Excel users are, the everyday consumers, everyone uses Excel. There's a billion people in the world. They understand unlimited. And so I have unlimited usage. And I have fraud detection. I have detection set up, rules in place, all done within Bubble to basically turn things off. It gives you a pop-up. It emails me when a user hits a certain amount, in which that amount is, in my opinion, or my approach out of it is more or less an anomaly. And so it shuts down, so that prevents any sort of bot just reusing it and abusing the ability to call to the API. And it's only been hit twice. And so Bubble, OpenAI itself, very low operating costs, and I priced competitively because I think it'll be a better way for me to re-engage with the customer to hopefully upsell them into a more valuable product long term.
Cool. Thanks, David. We have one maybe final question from Edmund. What measures did you put in place to make the answers more accurate than ChatGPT?
So lots of nights at like 4 a.m. of literally like looking through the data. And so actually just a couple of days ago, I reached 1 million formula requests since September.
Wow.
1 million. And I literally, like, I would spend some nights cracked out on coffee at 2 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, looking at the feedback, because even now and back then, the one thing it always had was feedback on, was the formula right or wrong? And my background is in data analytics. And so I started running some analysis and kind of breaking up the formulas that were coming out and seeing some trends, looking at it as a percentage of the total requests for a given formula, and realizing, hey, like out of the box, and this was even before Chat GPT, looking at like the code bases of Text DaVinci and Codex, consistently that there were some functions where it fell flat. And some functions, but also certain syntax. So one that always comes top of mind is OpenAI oftentimes struggled with differentiating between contains and equals. So if I write a formula that says calculate the sum of column A when column B contains the word, bubble, that's a lot different than equals the word bubble. And so lots of times, kind of typical feedback loop of seeing what's right and wrong, and early on fine-tuning a model. And then the additional models came out, in which I quickly realized that GPT-4, especially multi-language, because I get a lot of users that are non-English speakers, GPT-4, even after all that fine-tuning and the analysis and all that, GPT-4 was more accurate than even the fine-tuned model when it was corrected. And so what I do now, because GPT-4 even still falls flat for certain things, I basically put together a list of where it falls flat, and I incorporated it, because there's no fine tuning for GPT-4, at least not right now. And so I literally course corrected. I corrected all of the issues or where it falls flat, and I incorporated it in the prompt engineering. And so even the one that I mentioned, right, where it struggles differentiating contains versus equals, I write, when someone says contains, use this type of formula and use this type of syntax. And so that's just one example, but there's other examples that are like that, where I'm literally inputting what the formula should be based upon certain prompts.
And one final question, David, from Mayuka. Do you think that the relatability of your personal story as a builder, founder, appeals to potential customers as much as the functionality of the product? And how much do you think about that? How much is that a consideration in the marketing of Excel Formula Bot?
It's interesting, because I think of like my Twitter. Like when I started building this, I didn't have a brand page. I didn't even have a brand. And I was building in public and talking about my story to At that time, I think 300 followers. I think I'm upwards of about 3,000 now. And over time, especially, my strategy of doing a lot of influencer marketing, really across channel. I even worked with the influencer on Twitter. I had this divergence. It happened a few months ago where the brand Excel Formula Bot started getting more followers and engagement than my own personal self. And so I'm a firm believer of to a certain degree, building in public, and attracting people, because Elon Musk is a very rogue example of this. But Elon Musk has more followers on Twitter than Tesla, and there's a lot of other instances like that. And so people like following the founder because that's the like there's no at least in my opinion, there's no sugarcoating it, right? Like my brand, to a certain degree, there's brand protection. I'm only going to say certain things. I'm not going to use questionable memes, but like when it's myself, it's genuine and people like the story. And so, now there's, I think, about a little more than 500,000 people in which I have their email, they've registered, in which all my email communications, even still today, it's very personal. And so the email signature is David Bressler, founder. How I communicate them, over time, it's definitely gone from like, I did this to we, because I have hired people, but it definitely still has that personal effect. And, even something, I got an email going out later on this week of like the recent feature developments and listening to the customers, and the founder being on the forefront of listening to the customers and building and reiterating from them. And literally, like, I still respond to every single email. I haven't hired someone offshore or freelancer. My wife said she'd do it, but she hasn't done it yet. And so I literally respond to every single email that comes. And like I mentioned, I get a lot of individuals who don't speak English. I copy their texts. I go to Google Translate. I translate it, and then I write back, translate that, and I respond. And that goes a long way. And I think especially it's very ironic that I pride myself on that personal touch and customer service for an AI application. And so I see the irony in it, especially with the proliferation of all of these AI chatbots that are popping up these days. Even now, like on the website, there's a chat in which I get the email and I respond, and I try to respond very quickly. Even when I am working, I'll take a little side break every now and then. And so personal touch, at least in my opinion, still goes a long way in terms of customer service.
And that's, I get, if we go back to one of my favorite points in this is thinking about what ChatGPT can't do, is that personal touch as well, right?
Yep.
Well, David, thank you so much for your time. I have loved it. I think everyone else has found it super helpful, from speaking about launching your product from a really basic version, the argument to have no barrier, tips and tricks for launching on Reddit, tactics for working with influencers. I think there's been so many practical tips for launching a no-code AI product. So thank you so much for sharing all your learnings. I think this has been really helpful for people. If you haven't used Excel Formula Bot, please check it out. It's an amazing tool. And feel free to chat David at Bressler Tweets if you have any other questions.
This is awesome. Thank you for having me. This is awesome. Thank you all for still sticking around. I guess it resonated well with everyone here, considering it's been over an hour. So thank you.